Welcome to Under the Covers. I am your host, Siren, and tonight I am your guide through the depths of the darkness. Pour yourself a drink, do some gardening, and curl up under the covers as we surrender into the abyss. So I watched the Boiled One phenomenon today, and even though it's truly unnerving, I was more disturbed by the memories it has stirred up in me, all because of pseudocoma mentioned. I Googled, and it turns out it's another name for a locked-in syndrome, which reminds me of one of the scariest moments in my life. I think it was around 3 years ago. I was a freshman in undergrad, and I lived alone in my flat. I slept on a sofa bed facing the kitchen. I remember waking up in the middle of the night one day, unable to move anything except my eyes. I was laying on my right side, hands folded underneath my head. It took me a few seconds to realize what's going on, but just as the panic started settling in and I was rapidly looking around for any help, my legs suddenly twitched, and the motion returned to my body. I turned to the other side and went back to sleep. But I remember these terrible 5 seconds of genuine dread. I've been thinking about that and what would happen to me if I was suddenly locked in like that, unable to reach anyone. Took me a while to let it go. Initially, I thought that this was sleep paralysis, although it doesn't really match the description. A year later, I started having actual paralyses. Most likely it was the combination of my undiagnosed anxiety disorder and the acid I took a month prior, although I had a good trip and didn't experience any negativity initially. I had visual, audio, and tactile hallucinations during them. At first, I didn't worry, but then they were happening again, the gap between each next one becoming shorter and shorter. This is when I turned to a psychiatrist, got diagnosed, and treated my anxiety. Haven't experienced anything like that ever since. I know you must be thinking it was a dream. My mom tells me the same, but it felt so vivid to me that if I try, I can recall the sensation of your entire body being paralyzed. It probably makes no sense scientifically, but I feel horrible for people who have had to spend years like that. You can't even scream or cry. That's just it. It was right around this time of 3 years ago when my current boyfriend and I first met. A few weeks later, we went camping Halloween weekend in the woods right next to the supposedly haunted Helen's Bridge near Tunnel Road in Asheville, North Carolina. It was a beautiful spot up there with so much overlook, and with the bridge being right there with all the stories we've been told about its hauntings, true or not, it made it just scary enough for a little thrill. I wish I could say Helen's Bridge, as we had planned, was the scariest part about that weekend. Not even close. It was Halloween, and we were planning on going to a show that night. T, my boyfriend, and I planned with each other that I was going to get ready at camp while he walked back into town to get some drinks and something to eat before we left. If he didn't make it back before dark, it would not be more than 30 after that. I didn't have any problem with that. I had a lot of experience solo camping and was pretty woodsy. The most that would spook me would be a bear if one happened to wander up. We had chosen an area that was super secluded and more backcountry sort of camping, so it would just be us the whole weekend. More romantic that way. Like usual, it didn't take me long to get ready, and it was super peaceful up there. I knew it was going to be about another 45 minutes or so before he got back, so I decided to read a book in the tent, and the door opened with some fresh air. 10 minutes into reading, I hear a faint, fairly large branch break a couple feet behind my tent. I had learned how to gauge how large an animal is and how it might be in the past with the sound they make walking through the woods. This one seems big. A bear. It wasn't quite pitch black out yet, so I got out of my tent, turned around to shout at it to run away, and there stood a huge, probably 6'5" or 6'6" man. Completely taken off guard and pretty nervous about the situation, without thinking I said hi. He said hello and walked closer. Looking back, I wish I would have not been so friendly, but it had been habit. I thought he'd just set up camp probably somewhere nearby and would just do a quick introduction and retreat, but I was horribly mistaken. I don't know if he was saying things trying to get a rise out of me, scare me. I don't know what parts were true, still don't. He immediately started saying things like,
"What's a pretty little thing like you doing alone in the woods all by herself? Don't you know bad things happen to pretty little girls like you?"
I ignored him and said I wasn't alone. My boyfriend was right down the hill, going to the bathroom, and he would be right back. I hoped this would cause him to leave. But instead, he said,
"What if I told you that I'd been watching y'all for a few days now, and I know you're lying? He's gone for a minute. Why are you hiding out in the woods?" "I'm hiding because I raped my girlfriend's sister." "I can tell that bothers you. It bothers you a lot, doesn't it?"
My heart sank completely, and with a complete loss for words, I'm fairly certain my stomach was going to fall out of my ass. I was shaking, and I was just hoping he couldn't tell because of it getting darker. I wanted to appear annoyed and calm, just annoyed at its existence. I rolled my eyes, grabbed my water bottle to give my brain a few seconds to figure out how to tell him to get the fuck away from me. Maybe just that? Yep, let's go with just that. When I looked back up to tell him, he had somehow extremely quietly gotten significantly closer to me, close enough to punch me in the face, causing me to fall back. I was probably knocked out for only a second. When I opened my only one eye I could, he punched me again and tried to get on top of me. Terrified, I rolled out of it and just kept rolling until I got up and started running to where I didn't know. I had no light and no shoes and no phone, and it was a good mile or so before any neighborhood. I was screaming, and I could hear him screaming and chasing after me.
"You're dead when I catch you! You're so fucked when I catch you!"
I found a car and hid under it. I didn't see him after that. I was too scared to go anywhere near there, especially at night, so I asked someone in a house I knocked on to use their phone to call the police and my boyfriend. Ironically enough, turns out the monster's name was Jason. Halloween got entirely too real that year. I used to work in bar work and in the clubs in my local area. So this consisted of clean downs at like 3 a.m., not getting home until like 4:35. The thing is, after every shift, I was always so hungry. So I'd make something to eat when I got in and go straight up to bed after. The thing is, when I finished in the kitchen, I didn't bother to turn the lights on. I knew my parents' house like the back of my hand. I knew where I was walking. Straight through the back room, straight through the front room, in the hallway, up the stairs, to bed. When I turned that light off to walk through the back room, mouthful of sandwich, there was a humming from a girl right next to my ear, as if someone was stood there singing right into my ear. A young girl, and I felt the breath right on my cheek as she sung this little melody. It made me go ice cold within a second. I have never heard the humming before, or what it even was, or what she was humming, ever. But there is no possible remedy as to where this is coming from. All electricals were off. Everyone was in bed. The dogs were asleep. It wasn't windy. I didn't even have my phone on. It was in my pocket. I stopped walking when this happened, went absolutely ice cold, considered what just happened, and then carried on walking. I did not want to make a scene at this time in the morning. Not tonight, Spirit. Not after that shift. I still tell people about this years later. It's been at least 6-7 years. There is no possible reason that this happened other than it being a spirit humming in my ear. I remember the feeling of it, like ice cold breath down my cheek as she sung. It lasted only about 3 seconds, but I know what it was. I still remember it like it was last night, and them 3 seconds still absolutely haunt me. I do not believe in any spirituality or stuff like that, but I bloody do now. So this story is rather short because as I get older, I'm slowly losing more and more of memory of what happened so exactly, so I want to tell while I still remember what's left of it, because I don't think I'll ever forget the police with the red glowing eyes. So I was really young. I think 16 or 15. Me and my mom were playing video games. It was rather dark out and my dad was at work. We got a knock on the door. This part I remember clearly. Knock, knock, knock. I go over and look at the little peephole. See nothing. I think it's next door. I go back to playing games. My mom is now in the kitchen making dinner or something again. Knock, knock, knock. This time I hear loudly, "It's the police. Please open the door." I look out, the people, and see two completely black, shrouded individuals with glowing red eyes. Now we have a little light at our door, so it should have shown some features, but they were completely black, not skin tone, black like shadows. It's tough to explain. Anyway, I'm freaked out, so I go to get my mom. Tell her it's the police. She heads to the door, says, "Hello, who is it?" Again, we get knock, knock, knock. It's the police. Same exact voice, same exact tone. My mom, having a suspicious looking face, looks through the peephole and everything on her face drops. I knew she saw it too. She looks at me and tells me to get down. I do. She again says, "What do you need? What can I do for you?" And they again knock, knock, knock. "It's the police. Please open the door." She, quietly as she can, pushes it to lock it in and locks the bottom. Again, she says, "Please tell me what I am opening the door for." This time, no response. She goes to get her phone. Might be a dumb kid. I look again, and they are closer. Red eyes glowing brighter. I think, and the light outside is gone. It's just silhouettes. I scream, being genuinely horrified at this point. My mom rushes back with a knife in hand as I hide behind the couch. She's on the phone with my dad, explaining the situation as best as she can, and my dad, of course, thinks she's crazy, but says he's on his way. She calls the cops, and as she does, they slam on the door. Knock, knock, knock. "It's the police. Please open up." She yells to go away. "I have a gun." She didn't. She had a knife in hand, and so did I. Being a dumb kid, I quickly grabbed one from the kitchen without her noticing, to be honest. I don't really remember what happens past this. I remember looking again at my mom, screaming as she pushes the knife away from me. Then it stops. I look again, and they're gone, and my dad is home, saying none of what happened. You know, not believing us, and the police actually say that no one on record come to my house to check on anything. I will always remember this, and if you want any further details, please don't hesitate to ask. I really want to remember as much as I can before my memory of this fades. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you believe me about the red-eyed police. I'm almost 18 now, and since I was about 12, I've had a fear of being stabbed, specifically by another person. Throughout the years, the fear would manifest itself in different stories that involved being stabbed, and then I would have nightmares about. But now I think they're coming real, and I'm really scared. Starting last semester, I had a recurring nightmare that I got stabbed in the hallway of my school. And afterwards, my instructor in the room next to it would come out to see me laying there, and she would be aiding me until the ambulance arrived. The dream was the same every single time, being stabbed in the belly, the look of repressed horror in her eyes as she attempts to comfort me. When I walk past that hallway in real life, I'll sometimes go into a trance and see it in my mind again, while I'm fully awake. After I've experiencing all of this, I start noticing a man on campus with strange behaviors. He'll pace back and forth in front of the building sometimes, talking to himself as though he is the villain in an anime or something. But one day he came to school wearing these knives on his hands, like 5-inch long, sharp metal claws. I guess he wanted to wear to look intimidating. It makes me worry if he has other knives on him, which obviously encourages my fears further. I avoid making eye contact with him, and I have a few brief times, and he and I are just at this dead stare. I've also been having some freaky coincidences associated with that instructor woman that comes out to rescue me in those images. It's probably because I look up to her and view her as a symbol of safety, but I don't really know what the recurring nightmare is still about. I know coincidences don't really have any correlation or causation, but they still make the situation interesting to think about because they can sometimes provide good symbolism. At one point, I had a separate dream where her and I were sitting together somewhere. I was eating a piece of key lime pie. Back in the real world, a couple weeks after having this dream and after classes had let out for the summer, I went to a diner in a separate town and ordered some food to go, including a slice of pie of that flavor. While waiting for it, I looked up and saw that woman walk out the door. The strange thing is that when I took my food home, they forgot to put the pie in the bag. Also, when I had her class, we spoke a lot and she started talking about buffets. That weekend, a huge fire started in my town's buffet restaurant and half the restaurant burnt. It was really fucking scary. The connection I made with these two things to my fear is that if I were stabbed in the belly, then I would potentially be on a feeding tube after that and not be able to eat anymore. I look up my professors' names before having classes with them because I get curious who they are. Before I met this specific instructor lady, I had read a couple articles about her being a very dedicated player of roller derby. Like it was written about as a huge part of her life, and she was known for it. To this point, she's the only individual I have in my mind associated with. This is significant because I am a theater kid and decided that I would audition this fall for whatever my school's production would be. Then I saw on the flyer that it was a play about, see the pattern? You guessed it, roller derby. I looked up the play on the internet to try and find information on it, but it's so obscure that there's scarcely anything about it, which makes it weirder. I'm in theater club, so I asked the director where she found it, and she told me it was because she personally met the playwright of it at a festival, and it was around the time my fear ultimately started. Still can't figure this one out, but I think it's freaky as fuck. I auditioned, by the way, and I didn't get the part. I know the coincidences aren't that serious, but I'm still afraid of that guy and being stabbed. Please help. This happened during my freshman year of college. I was taking a theater appreciation class, and we had to attend some of the plays of the theater department that they put on. Normally I went with my friends, but for this one, I had to go alone since I had another event where my friends went. The play started at 6:30, so I set out on the short 10-minute walk to the theater. When I arrived, I saw a man standing by the entrance. Out of habit, I smiled at him. I tend to do that with strangers. He smiled back, but there was something about him that made me feel uneasy. He got in line right behind me, and while we waited, I overheard him muttering to himself about his car and where it was parked. I really wasn't paying attention until I heard him say, "Where are you sitting?" I thought he was talking to someone else, so I didn't respond. Once my ticket was scanned, I went in and found my seat. But then, to my surprise, the same man sat down right next to me. I heard him mumble, "I can't believe it," right next to me. His tone sent a chill through me, but I tried to ignore it. He was probably in his early 30s, and soon enough, he turned to me and started asking questions. Too many questions. "Do you come to these plays often?" he asked. I told him no. He quickly launched into how he thought he was a regular, and they loved him, even mentioning that his girlfriend was in the play that night. I was still creeped out, but I felt a twinge of guilt for judging him so quickly. Maybe he was just being friendly. But then something strange happened. Everything I said, he had the same interests, the same experiences. It was unsettling. He asked what kind of music I liked. I decided to mention Regina Spektor, a lesser-known artist, thinking he wouldn't know her. His response, "Oh, I love Regina Spektor. She's amazing. I listen to her all the time." It was too much. He was agreeing with everything I said. The more he did, the more uncomfortable I felt. Right before the play started, a woman around his age sat on my other side. The moment she sat down, he went quiet. Then, oddly, the woman struck up the same kind of small talk with me. She even asked similar questions, almost as if they had compared notes. As she talked, she touched my arms a few times, in this weird, too familiar way, just like the man had done earlier. I felt trapped between them. Thankfully, the play started and everyone went silent, but I could still feel their eyes on me, watching me the whole time. At intermission, the man offered to get me something from concessions. I declined, but he kept insisting. "I'll surprise you," he said, his tone a little too eager. I kept saying no, but he seemed frustrated, and eventually he got up to leave. As soon as he was gone, the woman picked up right back where we had left off, asking me about singing because she thought my voice sounded pretty. I told her I used to sing in high school but had stopped. Again, she touched my arm, and while she talked more than once, and it made my skin crawl. When the man returned, he brought back some M&Ms and Milk Duds, both of which looked like they had already been opened. He offered me the Milk Duds and I declined. He didn't eat them either, just placed them on the floor, like he wasn't sure what to do next. Then he started asking more personal questions about my family and whether I came to college alone. I lied, telling him I lived with my brother in an apartment far from where I actually stayed. That's when he leaned in and told me he was an amateur music producer and that I had a great voice and I should come by his place sometime to record. He just happened to live near where I said I lived. It was all too much, and the tension in my chest wouldn't go away. Then his phone buzzed. He quickly looked at it and tried to hide the screen, but I saw the message. "She's really cute. Do you think she'll work?" My heart was racing. I wanted to bolt right then and there, but I didn't know what to do. The woman beside me suddenly touched my arm again and whispered that she was going to the bathroom, suggesting I come with her. At first, I thought maybe she noticed the man's odd behavior and was trying to help, but then I saw her phone light up in her lap with a message that read, "Yes." It was from an unsaved number. I felt my stomach drop. She never went to the bathroom. We all just sat there as the second half of the play dragged on, tension thick in the air. Both of them kept glancing at me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The moment the play ended, I got up and climbed over the woman, making my way to the exit as fast as possible. Once outside, I darted into the bathroom, trying to collect myself. When I finally came out, I saw the man and the woman standing in the corner of the foyer, having what looked like a heated, whispering argument. When the woman spotted me, she immediately stopped talking, and the man began walking toward me. "I can give you a ride to your apartment," he offered. I told him no, and that my brother was picking me up. Just then, one of my classmates ran over, calling to me, "Susie, hey Susie!" Not my real name, but for privacy, let's go with that. The man backed off when he saw my friend. We left together, and as we walked out, I heard him yell behind me, "Susie, hope to see you again." I didn't look back. I just ran, staying on the phone with my mom the whole time. Now, I can't stop wondering, why did they act like that? And like they didn't know each other when they clearly did. Why did they both ask me the same creepy questions, touching my arm like they were trying to establish some weird familiarity? And what was with the texts? Were they communicating with each other about me the whole time? Where did that candy come from? Why was it already opened? Why didn't he eat it? And why did they keep acting like they were trying to separate me, asking me if I wanted to go to the bathroom or ride with them? Am I paranoid, or was something seriously wrong? Also, a girl had been abducted, trafficked, and murdered in my college town a year or so ago, and that whole situation makes me uneasy. This happened to me when I was 14, or rather, should I say, this happened to us. If you were to ask how many times my cousin's parents bounced from house to house, he would just shrug his shoulders. That's how often his parents would move. Sometimes it would be houses, sometimes apartments. I do miss the times when he did live in apartments, as whenever we would play hide and seek with our other closest cousins, it would definitely be more exciting than just playing with some random kids from the apartment complex. Anyways, not important to the story. His parents were always a little weird, always constantly moving and leaving for business trips. That's how they could afford to move from place to place. And if you were to ask me what his parents did for a living, I literally have no idea because I barely talked to them. And if I ever did, it was at parties they threw. You know how that goes. The only thing I know is that his dad is a contractor, and that's literally about it. I remember this day like the back of my hand. It was hot as hell. That day almost like 100 degrees. It felt like more like 110, but it wasn't not too bad. I used to always have sleepovers at his house whenever I could get the chance, and this day was no different, or so I thought. I arrived at his house in the early hours of the afternoon, and as expected, his parents were away on a business trip. We opened up some of the windows so we could let out the hot air, and granted, this probably didn't help our case at all, and most likely made it worse. We turned on each fan to max blast and went upstairs to play video games on his Xbox. We played for about an hour or two, and eventually we both got hungry. We agreed to go to this spot that was a 10-minute drive from his house. We got dressed, and before we left, we closed some of the windows. That way, if anybody were to drive or walk by, they wouldn't just hop through the window. The irony while writing this still hits me like a brick to this day. We just got in the car and drove to the spot we agreed to get food. I say my car because my mom trusted me enough to let me drive one of her spare cars, and as bad as that sounds, she trusted me enough on the road by myself. She knows I would never jeopardize my life or even remotely drive recklessly. We ordered our food and quickly headed back home to avoid traffic. When we got home, we sat in the living room and watched YouTube or whatnot while we ate our food. We sat there for a good hour or two before we headed back upstairs to his room, and around 7 or 8, we closed each window as it was getting dark out. I'll cut out the small details as you can use your imagination what teenagers our age do. I got thirsty and decided to go downstairs to get me a cup of water before I decided to go to bed. It was around 10 at this point, and I was getting tired, so quickly I filled up my cup and headed back upstairs. My cousin was already in bed scrolling through social media and whatnot. Shortly after, he rolled on his side and fell asleep. I couldn't fall asleep because of how incredibly hot it was, but after 10 minutes of rolling around and flipping the pillow around, I eventually fell asleep. I woke up sometime later. I checked my phone and it was 1 a.m. I'm not sure what woke me up, but something woke me up. I rubbed my eyes and I took a sip of water. Now that I was awake and aware, I heard it. Footsteps moving around downstairs. At first, I chalked it up to his parents coming back early from a business trip. But the footsteps kept pacing between one place. I'd hear drawers being opened and rummaged with. Footsteps going between the living room and guest bedroom downstairs. I walked over to my cousin and shook him awake. He groggily said, "What?" I asked him, "Are your parents supposed to be home?" His head snapped back to look at me and said, "No, they're not supposed to be back till Tuesday." This made my heart skip a beat. I quickly tiptoed to the door and locked it. Just as I was about to walk away from the door, I heard it. Footsteps coming slowly up the stairs as if they were trying to be quiet. I know my cousin heard it too, because as soon as I turned my head to look in his direction, he was already quietly running to the window to unlock it. We were trying to lift it up, but the piece of shit was so old it wouldn't budge. We were grunting as quietly as we could, but it wasn't quite enough. We heard the doorknob tried to be turned, but obviously it was locked. I think this angered the person on the other side, because when he saw the door didn't budge, he started kicking it and ramming into it. Now the clock was ticking, adrenaline kicked in, and we finally got the window to open. I yelled at my cousin, "Anthony, go!" And he leaped down into the grass. Now it was my turn. I peeked my head over the edge and saw the fall. Had to be about 10 or 20 feet. Suddenly I heard the door being busted open. I didn't think twice and I just threw myself out the window. I landed on my right arm and backside, and I looked up and saw a man with long, messy hair and his eyes wide looking right at me. I quickly got up and we bolted to the neighbor's house where we used the phone to call 911. The police showed up minutes later and investigated the house. They searched every room and every hiding space there could be, but there was no one to be found. He was already long gone. Later, I found out from paramedics I sprained my collarbone and bicep. Luckily, nothing too serious. After that, the police took information regarding what happened and took a description of him. They said they would contact us if anything ever came up, but we never got a call back. I didn't tell my mom about the incident in fear of never getting to sleep over at his house ever again, and told her I fell from a very high rock and landed on my side. She took me to a doctor because I complained about the pain in my shoulder. That's how I found out. Me and my cousin both assumed that when we left to go get food or whenever we went upstairs and before we closed the windows, the man simply just climbed through and hid in the basement, waiting until we both fell asleep to rob us or maybe even worse. We rarely even talk anymore, but whenever we bring it up, we both laugh at it. I don't think the man was ever caught. I just hope he doesn't try and do anything bad to anyone else like he could have done to us.